Alrighty, let's review for Unit 7b for the test. How many cycles of this tangent graph are from 0 to 6? Well, we want to find the period of this, and then once you know the period, you see how many periods, because a period is a cycle. So this word really means period, how many periods there are from 0 to 6. So let's find the period. Period of tangent is pi divided by b. And if you look right here, b is pi over 3. So pi divided by pi over 3. When you divide, as you can see, you make it a multiply and flip. The pi's cancel, you got 3. So my period is 3. So my period's 3. How many periods or cycles are there in 6? That would be 3 times 2 is 6, so it would be 2 cycles, or 2 periods. For question 2 here, I want to graph this tangent graph. So for this tangent graph, you know your MAP, so your M, your midline is y equals -1, right there. Actually, your A is -1 because the number in front, but it's not an amplitude. So your A is important, the -1. And your period, well, your B value is 1, so your period is going to be pi divided by 1 because it's tangent. If it was cosine or sine, a sinusoid, it would be 2 pi divided by B, but the B is 1. Anyways, so pi for tangent divided by 1 is pi. So that's our midline, that's our period, and our A is -1. And what is this right here saying? That's called a horizontal shift. And in trig, you call it a phase shift. And that means we're going to go pi over 3. But you're going in the opposite of negative, so you're going to go in the positive direction, which is right pi over 3. So all that together, let's make the graph. I always put my midline first, -1. Then I do my phase shift. So what's going to happen is I'm going to graph at pi over 3 to the right. Normally our graph starts here for tangent. I'm going to start it right there, pi over 3 over. All right. Then to graph a tangent, you need to go 1 period over to find your next dot. So if we're at pi over 3, which is a third of pi, what is 1 pi over? Well, 1 pi over, I made a mistake writing this, is not 2/3 pi. That is not 1 pi over. What would it be? It would be, this technically should be 4/3 pi, which is 1 and a third. 4/3 is 1 and a third. So if we start at pi over 3 and we go 1 pi over unit, that would be 1/3 plus 1 is 4/3 pi. So sorry for that mistake right there. That should be a 4. Okay, so to make a graph now for tangent, we put a line smack down the middle. Okay, I don't worry about the exact value. I just need to know it's smack between these 2 points. Then you treat this like a sine graph. For sine, since it's a negative a value, halfway between these values, you're going to go down a, which is 1. Halfway between these values, you're going to go up 1. If you had a sine graph, it would look like this. Boom. But it's not sine. With the asymptote here, you're going to start here and go whoosh, up towards the asymptote. Then here, you're going to go through that point and up closer to the asymptote. And that is 1 cycle of this tangent graph. Remember, it has this midline. It has downward tangent, so we should be dropping. It has a phase shift, which we started at right pi over 3. And the vertical stretch is a -3, down, and up 3 from the midline. All right, for this problem, which function makes the same graph of tangent x? So which of these would get the same graph of this? All right, meaning, maybe take that back. Which one would make tangent x? Which tangent x is here in the green. So which of these would do the same thing is the question. Now right off, I really hope you could cross that one out, because sine won't make a tangent. Okay, right off, we're done with that one. Now, but how did I get this green graph? Well, do you notice tangent is always starting at 0. Pi is your period, right down the middle, up 1, down 1. There's your graph. Then, let's graph this one. Isn't this one say we're going to do a horizontal shift right pi over 2? So wouldn't this graph mean we're going to start at pi over 2, and it would start here, my next dot goes there, which would not be the same as the green graph. So I could cross that off. All right, let's go to this one. This one says I start at pi, horizontal shift pi. So if I move this graph over and started here at pi and made this red graph, isn't this tangent? If I start here and make tangent, wouldn't it be the red graph here? Is that the same graph? Well, if you think about it, yes, I started here and I created this graph. That's a tangent graph starting at pi, the red piece. If I continued this graph this way, would it make the green graph, which would make the same graph as this? Yes, it would. So B is my answer, because if I were to graph this, I'd get the red graph, which you can then continue it either direction, and it would match this tangent graph. Or you could think of it as taking the tangent graph and making it the green one and going one step to the right, and what you would basically find out is this graph and this graph will land on top of each other, except this one just started technically over here, where this one started at the green, but they'll end up overlaying each other. Now, how do you know this one won't work? Because this is 1.5 pi, so this one's going to start here at 1.5 pi, and then the next dot's going to be over here, so it would be offset. So I could cross this one out as well. Hopefully that helps. Question 4. Which function has an amplitude of 8 and a period of 1/2? Now, amplitude of 8 is hopefully pretty obvious. So which of these have an amplitude of 8? All of them. Okay, that is pointless. Why is that even? Yeah, they all have 8. Okay, so it's really just asking what's the period. Okay, if it has a period of 1/2. So period equals 2 pi over b on a trig, on a sinusoid, and you can see all these have sines or cosines. So its period is 2 pi over b, and the period is 1/2. So I put a 1/2 here. So I put 1/2 for the period. I'm going to solve for b. So cross multiply. That gives you b. That gives you 4 pi. So b equals 4 pi. So which of these graphs have a b value, a number in front of the x of 4 pi, and an 8 in the front? So let's look here, 8 in the front and a 4 pi. That looks like it. Let's double check for the other ones. This one has an 8, but it's not a 4 pi. This is an 8, but it's not a 4 pi. This is an 8, but it's a 2 pi. So A is the answer. Boom. That one has what we're looking for. All right, let's find the amplitude and period and then write the function equation for this. So right off the bat, if we look at this, all right, that is my initial value, and that right there is 1 period. So this is what we're looking at right here will help you. I always like to start at 0 and then make one cycle. So what we notice here is also, by the way, when you start on the midline, you should know it's a sine, an upside down sine. Okay, that is a sine graph starting at 0, and it's a negative a value. So I have my a is 1/2. How do you know that? Well, didn't you go up 1/2 and down 1/2? So you see a negative 1/2 there. That's your a value. Your period, like we said, is from 0 to 1, so it's a period of 1. The midline is the x-axis, so there's no midline. The last thing we need to know is how to convert the period to a b value. Okay, so again, the period is 1. So the period equals 2 pi over b, so that's 1, period's 1. So that's 1 over 1, cross multiply, solve. When I do that, I get b equals 2 pi. So b is always what's in front of the x, so that's a 2 pi x. The a, again, was up 1/2, down 1/2, and it's negative because it's upside down, and it's sine because it starts at the midline. Now, if it started here and went down to here, it'd be a cosine. But this is a sine. All right, I like this question. It takes a little bit of thinking, but it's a pretty cool question. High tide of an ocean shore begins at 12 a.m., midnight. So at 12 a.m., high tide, and it measures 10 feet. So at 12 a.m., it's 10 feet high is the tide. The low tide occurs at 6 a.m. and is measured as 2 feet. So at 6 a.m., 2 feet. See right there, 2 feet. So I go from 10 feet to 2 feet in a 6-hour span. Now that's not a whole period. You have to consider that. That's only half of a period. Model the tide as a cosine function. Okay, that's important. It's a cosine graph, so that's going to be important. Hours are h. All right. So h represents midnight. So h of 0 represents midnight. So What I made a mistake on is, by the way, this equation, that should be an h in the end, because it's not x, it's h. I missed that. Anyways, so let's talk about this equation. Where did I make that equation? Well, if we started here at 10, we ended at 2. Well, your midline, how did I get 6 as my midline? Well, from 10 to 2. Let's see, 10 to 2. Well, what's 10? To find the middle of something, go 10 plus 2 divided in half. This is called averaging. To find the middle of something, you average it. 10 plus 2 divided by 2 equals 12 divided by 2 equals 6. So that right there is one way to find the middle. Or you just look at it. Okay, what's the middle line? Well, I need a line so that half is above and half is below. You could also think of it that way. And if you think of it that way, that gives us our amplitude. Because if you look at this line, isn't it 4 up and 4 down? 4 up, 4 down, meaning your amplitude is now 4. So there's different ways of doing it. You could again take the high minus plus the low and average it. Or you could just look at it and think, okay, what line would be half up and half down? Your call. But anyways, that gives us the amplitude, which is the distance up and down from the midline. That was our midline. And our period, how to get 12 here? Well, you might think about it as a whole day. Because this from here to here is not a full day. Sorry, a full period. A full period would go like here and back up, which in this situation would be 12 p.m. And I take that back. Your period is not one full day. It's 12 hours, which is half a day. My mistake. One full period drops and has to get back up to where it started. 6 hours here, so 6 hours here. So it's a 12-hour time frame. So one cycle is half of a day. So 2 cycles would be a whole day, or 24 hours. So your P, if you want to write it, would be 24 hours. All right, so write an equation. We know it's cosine because it starts high, ends low, and because it says cosine. Let me go back to there. I know my amplitude's 4, so put the 4 there. I know my 6 goes there. Where to get pi over 6? Well, if I know my period's 12, so 12 equals 2 pi over b. And if I solve, I cross multiply 12b, cross multiply 2 pi, divide by 12, pi over 6. So b is pi over 6, so pi over 6h, not x. I made that mistake. So that should be an h, not an x. And there we go. That would be the equation. Should have boxed that or circled that. There it is. Always want to box or circle your answer. And that would be the equation of a cosine graph that follows this story. All right, next question. Which equation is for this graph? So right off the bat, if we look at it, I'm going to start right here because I like to start, I don't want to have a phase shift. So I want to start at 0. If I start there, I go down to here, and that's not a full cycle. So what I did down here is I regraphed it. I started at 2. If you see down here, I dropped to 2. It looks like, because right here, sorry, at 1, I dropped to 0. So I start at 2, at 1 I'm at 0. So if I continue this, I would drop another 2 to my minimum. And then if you keep the pattern going, my next, at another 1 interval, I go back to 0, and I go back up. So I'm starting here, going down, and going back up with the graph. So this is the full graph of this. This is kind of hard to see again because they didn't give you the full picture. So looking at this, can you tell it's cosine? So right off, I'm going to cross that one off. All right, next, my amplitude is 2 because I go up 2, down 2. Look at all these, they're all amplitude 2. My period is 4. How to get that? Well, right here, looks like about 2, but it's half of it. Or look at this one, I go all the way to 4 to make my full cycle. So if my period's 4, remember I go 4 equals 2 pi over b. Solve it. This becomes 4b. This becomes 2 pi. Divide by 4, pi over 2. So b equals pi over 2. Well, that's not pi over 2. Okay, these are both pi over 2. Kind of hard to see, but that's pi over 2x. Pi over 2x. So both of these could be it. They're both cosine. They're both 2. So which one is it? Well, look at this green graph. Is that happy or sad? Is that the normal or has it been flipped? It's D. It has not been flipped. So that is the answer we are looking for. All right, question number 8. If x represents the time in seconds, and f of x represents the height of a yo-yo, then which function has the lowest yo-yo height? Okay, let's look at A. There's different ways to look at this, by the way. So A has a amplitude of 3 and a initial midline of 4. So if I start at 4, aren't I going to be going down 3 and up 3? If we look at this, it doesn't really matter what the graph looks like. I just know I start at 4, I'm going down 3 and up 3. So if I go down 3, and I'm looking for the lowest, make sure you watch out for that one, the lowest yo-yo height. So I'm looking at the bottom. This yo-yo will go down to 1 foot and up to 7 feet. All right, the next one, B here, I am at 8 for the middle, and I'm going up and down 4. So I'm at 8, I'm going to go up 4, down 4. So the lowest this one will ever go is 4 feet low. All right, next one, C, I'm starting midline 6, and so I'm up and down 2. So this is going up 2, down 2, up 2, down 2. So my lowest I'm going to go is 4. So far, that's the lowest. This one, my midline is 5, so I start at 5. And I'm going up 3, down 3, up 3, down 3, up 3, down 3. So that would be 3 feet down, 3 feet up. I'm looking at the lowest as 2. So 2 is lower than 4, but 1 is the lowest. So A is the lowest of all of them. Okay, which would be the highest of all of them? This one, 12, B. Now this might not make sense. Oh, at 12 feet, how's my yo-yo going 12 feet in the air and 4 feet down? That is a different story. Bad example. It doesn't make a lot of sense for a yo-yo going 12 feet, 4 feet. The numbers don't make a lot of sense unless you're like throwing that yo-yo in the air or something. I don't know. Something's weird about this one. But ignore that part. Sorry. All right, number 9. A sine graph reaches a maximum of this and a minimum of this in a single cycle. What is the amplitude? Be careful. We just want the amplitude. All right, so we start with pi over 4 is 11. So pi over 4, we're up 11. At pi of negative 1, pi is negative 1. So the amplitude is the distance from up and down, how far up you went and how far down you went. Now you could find the midline to do that. To find the midline, you would have done 11 plus negative 1 divided by 2. You average it, which would be 10 divided by 2 equals 5. That's your midline. That's how I got 5. That's one way. And then find the midline, you know you went up 6 and down 6. That is one way. The other way is different, but what you do is you find the difference between 11 and negative 1. So you subtract them and half it, and the difference is 12. And you went half because there are two amplitudes. You have one amplitude up and one amplitude down. So you can find the difference of the two values and then divide it in 2 because the amplitude is one up and one down. Or you could find the midline and just judge it from the midline how far up and down you went. It's your call what works out better. It is a little confusing. One subtracts, one adds. This one's averaging. This one's trying to find the distance between 1 and negative 1, and that comes with subtracting. And the reason, again, for the divide by 2 is the highest to lowest is a 12 length, and half of that 12 length would be 6, which is your amplitude. Alrighty, let's graph this equation. It's a cosine function. Negative 6 means your amplitude is 6 and it's being flipped. The 4 here is telling us that is our b value. So our b value is 4, so our period is 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. There's our period. And our midline, since there's nothing added at the end, is right here at the middle, which is y equals 0. So to graph this, it's a negative cosine. So I know cosine will start at the minimum. If it's a negative, goes up and back down in one period. And your period, again, is pi over 2. So pi over 2 is the end. So I start here and end there. In the middle of these two, I went up amplitude of 6. And halfway between here and here, you always hit the midline on a cosine. Halfway between here to here, you always hit the midline on a cosine graph. Okay, so be careful. A negative, again, means it's upside down. Be careful of that. Read everything carefully. It might help to list all this out before you graph. Next question here. Which of the following is a vertical asymptote for this? There are different ways of looking at it. I'm going to go by sketching. So this is a tangent graph. So pi is your period. I have a phase shift left of pi over 2 because it goes opposite, so that's going to be negative pi over 2. So we start here at negative pi over 2, which I forgot to put negative on there. All right, so we start at negative pi over 2, and pi is 1 period length, asymptote down the middle. Then here again, we have another pi period length, asymptote down the middle, and you can keep going. But we got the basic sketch. I don't even need to draw the sketch. I'm just looking for asymptotes. So all you do, again, you start where it starts, do a period, a period, a period, a period, asymptotes down the middle. Let's look. Is pi an asymptote? Well, yeah, it is. Isn't pi halfway between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2? Isn't 1 halfway between a half and a 1 1/2? So bam, there's the answer. Let's show the other ones don't work. Pi over 2, no, that's a dot. 6 over pi, yeah, that's, you can see a pattern here. That's not going to be it. And pi over 4 is right here, halfway between these, and there's no asymptote there. So yes, A is the right answer. Next question. A sound wave models a sinusoid function. A sinusoid means sine or cosine. We have to figure that out as we do this problem. If the wave reaches a maximum of this and a minimum of this, what are the midline amplitude and period of the function? Write an equation and graph it. So basically, we're doing our normal stuff here, but we're starting with 2 dots here. So let's start with these 2 dots. Let's plot those 2. So if I plot them, I got pi over 2 is negative 2, and I got pi equals 6. So at pi, we're at 6. So that's my max and my min. So if I sketch that in between, I know there's a curve like this between them. All right. And I always know from a max to a min, halfway between is going to hit the midline. That's just a given. All right. So from there, how did I find my midline is 2? Well, what I thought here is from 6 to negative 2. Well, if I average them, I could go 6 plus negative 2 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 equals 2. So can you tell that's 2? So I averaged, that's my midline. There's other ways of doing it. We talked about other ways in other problems. But let's double check. 4 up, 4 down, that's the middle. So my amplitude is 4. All right. Next, we have to figure out if it's sine or cosine. Now, you might wonder, where did I get this graph from? All right, this graph might be a little confusing because this is what I'm given. But don't I like to have my graph start at 0? So I want to keep my graph going and seeing if I could start at 0 without, I don't want to have a phase shift. So what I did is I got this pattern and I replicated it. So if this right here is pi over 2, it's going to do another pi over 2 back up, which makes us hit perfectly right there. And what I notice here is, oh, I have a cosine graph. And I have a period of pi. Period of pi. My amplitude is 4. Oh, there's a mistake. I am not flipping. I don't know why I put that there. This graph is not flipped. So it does not have a flip. So that's crossed out. And my period is pi. So it's a cosine graph. That's why I have cosine. Amplitude 4, good. 2 at the end, good. But where to get the 2 from? Oh, period's pi. So if the period is pi, pi equals 2 pi over b, cross multiply solve, I get b is 2. So 2 is the number in front of the x. So again, 4 is the amplitude, midline, b value. Your period creates your b value, just always remember that. This one's a little tricky, and the reason I know it's cosine is because that shape is a cosine. Now I could have started from here and done the graph, and that's where I guess I said flip. I was starting from here and I saw, okay, flipping it, it's going to look like that, it's going to have a phase shift, and I was like, ugly, ugly, don't mess with that. So what I did is I decided to go backwards and try to find it at 0 to help myself out, and that is my graph of cosine. Be very careful knowing the difference between sines and cosines on this test, but as you can tell, midline amplitude period is huge, and the b value, which comes from the period. All those things are very important. Not a ton of phase shift on this test. Make sure you know it. These are more important than phase shift when it comes from my perspective.